This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company and Purdy Insurance. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Sunbury Motor Company and Purdy Insurance. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. And online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Kia, Hyundai, the best in new inventory. And I can attest to that. I'm driving back from the Philadelphia International Airport yesterday morning. Took the red eye back. Landed at 6:30 in the morning. And when I got up to the parking garage, I saw my vehicle sitting there like going, thank goodness I have that car. Man, literally said that. Got in and then drove back to State College. And you can have the same kind of experience. Ford, Kia, Hyundai, the best in new inventory. Great warranties, great deals. Pre-owned inventory. Your budget may be saying, I'd love to get new, but. Okay. Or maybe you prefer pre-owned inventory. They go over every one in the lot. And a terrific service department that backs it up every step of the way. That really makes it one-stop shopping between the buying of the vehicle, the financing of the vehicle, taking care of the vehicle. Quick lane, inspections, routine, difficult. They handle it all at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Friday night was one of those magical nights at the Jordan Center. I watched Friday night I watched in Eugene, in Oregon. Record indoor crowd, 16,006. They had not been selling out the Jordan Center for wrestling this year until Friday night. And they came out in droves. And I know Ohio State had a couple of guys out of the lineup. But they had a couple of guys out of the lineup. And Penn State won 9 out of the 10 bouts. And it just goes back to what we've been saying the entire time. The gap between Penn State and everybody else is an absolute chasm. People get antsy when Rocco Welsh has a close match. What? Somebody's got to. Now, in 125, 133, they did. But everything else is not close. That's what gets me in all these dual meets. They'll wrestle Princeton this weekend, Friday night. That'll be in Rec Hall. That's senior night. It's one. There's a good chance they'll shut them out. But they'll then get 2 weeks, and then the Big Tens are here. What's interesting is the Big Tens being here. There's no doubt that the sessions will be sold out. My question is, what does Penn State get out of it? Because it's a Big Ten run event. And, of course, the Jordan Center is its own entity. It's not as if all I know is that for you, the fans, it'll be phenomenal once we get there in a little bit less than 3 weeks. I mean, phenomenal. I mean, to see, essentially it's the NCAA championships I'd say 75% of the best wrestlers in the country will be there, collegiately, for the Big Tens. And that may be a conservative number. So that's how the weekend got going. Now, hockey, they got a point on Friday because they tied, and then and then and they lost in a shootout. Then Michigan just played one Saturday. They're back home this weekend. And then there's basketball. Split on the West Coast. Played actually really well on Wednesday night. Really well, especially defensively. It's easily the best defensive performance I've had since the calendar turned to 2026. The problem was they got off to that kind of start against Oregon on Saturday. And then they did a couple of dumb things, which got them sideways, and suddenly Oregon ran 10 unanswered. Where Penn State had control of the first half of the game. I'm talking about the first half of the opening half. And their defense was just not even in the same boat as Washington. And in my opinion, just my opinion, that only Nate Biddle and Kwame Evans could play for Washington. And even then, Hannes Steinbach is easily the best player I've seen from a West Coast team this year. Easily. He is a possible lottery pick in the NBA. So, that game on Saturday was, if you lose, you lose, okay. But early on, they had some control of the game, and they're like, okay, here we go. This looks good. And then as soon as they got sideways, now they're playing uphill again. So they're back against Rutgers on Wednesday at 6. And Rutgers did win yesterday. They snapped their losing streak. They beat Maryland at home. And that will be Wednesday at 6 o'clock. All right. So that's the schedule for this week. Okay. That's the schedule for this week. We got Mark Wogenrich on the show today. I'm going to talk some Penn State football with him. And then Todd Zalecki on the Phillies at 2:35. So. And there you go. So let's get to Jerome Tang of Kansas State. Fired today after his rant about the players. And so he goes on this rant, and my first thought was when I heard the rant, it's quite simple. No matter whether the players are making money or not, you don't criticize the players. You just can't. Right? You blame the players for something, even though they probably are at fault. Now, remember, he's the one that assembled the team, okay? They're in last place right now in the Big 12. They have one win. They were blown out at home by Cincinnati on Wednesday. The basis for the for-cause firing is language in Tang's contract that references any activity that brings public disrepute, embarrassment, and ridicule to Kansas State. Well, geez, I mean, that covers like a wide range of activity. And remember when Kansas State was playing in Madison Square Garden a couple of years ago? And they were trying to get to the Final Four. He's the toast of the day. Again, you too many times people jump on bandwagons and a bunch. And I always say, just let it breathe. Let's just see. Give it some time. Right? People go, no, that's the wrong approach. Okay. I'm not going to change my approach. But people jump on best ever, this, that, greatest of all time. But I'm like, let it breathe. Let's wait for the career's over. And then, well, he's the hot guy. Everybody's got to have him. Jerome Tang got to have him. Well, it's not going well. Kansas State Athletic Director Gene Taylor said in a statement, this was a decision that was made in the best interest of our university and the men's basketball program. Cleverly written, I might add. Recent public comments and conduct, in addition to the program's overall direction, have not aligned with the K-State standards for supporting student athletes. Here's your key. And representing the university. We wish him all the best. Thank you. Now, Tang signed a contract extension in 23 that goes through the 2030 season. There is still $18.67 million remaining on the deal. He plans to fight the for-cause firing. Deeply disappointed with the university's decision and strongly disagree with the characterization of my termination, he told ESPN. Said, I've always acted with integrity and faithfully fulfilled my responsibilities as the head coach. So they did lose by 14 to number 3 Houston on Saturday. The game was played without the names of the players on the back of the jerseys. Tang had said after the Cincinnati loss, quote, these dudes do not deserve to wear this uniform. There will be very few of them in it next year. I'm embarrassed for the university. I'm embarrassed for our fans, our student section. It's ridiculous. I have no answers, no words. That's what he said. Again, he criticized the players. Like that is like in every single sport now. Do you ever see an NFL coach or an NBA coach get into the face of a player after something that you and I both know is stupid? You ever see that during the game? How often do we see coaches on the sideline now after something really dumb happens, just standing there staring out at it? They're not allowed to show emotion anymore. They are not allowed. And Kansas State got to the Elite Eight his first season. They won 26 games. He's the toast of the town. He took over the program's most victories since Bruce Weber's first season in 2013. In fact, I just saw Bruce last week. I had a nice talk with him. They couldn't continue the momentum. They missed the NCAA tournament year or two. Then they were 16 and 17 last year. This year they're 10 and 15. Some of the fans in the student section wore bags over their heads during the loss to Cincinnati. Now, I've crossed paths with Tang before. But he was an assistant coach at the time, and he's fine, all right? Because he was at Baylor for 20 years, and Penn State played Baylor in the NIT championship game in 2009. In the statement, Tang said, I'm grateful to the players, staff, and fans who make this program so special. I remain proud of what we built together, confident that I have always acted in the best interest of the university and our student-athletes. Kansas State would name an interim coach soon, and that a national search for a replacement has already begun. All right, So, again, the old school, and look, I literally was just out at Oregon. So you go into, Dick and I tried to get into MacArthur Court. We got in the building, but we could not get to the court. Every door was locked because we wanted to see, like, hey, MacArthur Court, Kamikaze Kids. This is with Dick Harder coach, the whole thing, right? And Dick was very, very, very tough on the players. Very tough. I know. My first season full time and doing Penn State basketball was Dick's last season at Penn State. So, I mean, believe me, I know. He was always very tough on the players. And he would not be the first coach ever to ban now, Tang did not ban them from the locker room. But over the years, I've heard of other coaches that have banned their players from the locker room. I've heard of other coaches banning them from wearing in practice the school's gear, that they had to earn it back. All these things I've heard before, right? But it's 2026 now. You can't do that anymore. You can't say in public like that anymore. You can't. Now, who assembled the team? He did. He assembled the team. But it's very different now. I saw an interview with Mike Krzyzewski. I thought that was very interesting and enlightening when I was on the road. I'm watching this interview, and he says, if I were 60 years old today, I think, what's Mike now, 78, something like that. And he said, if I were 60 years old and I had a choice between coaching Duke, he says, and you know how much I love Duke, or coaching an NBA team, he said, I coach an NBA team. I thought, well, this will be interesting, is the reasons why. And the reasons why were really, really logical. He said, I am absolutely for pay for play for college players. He says, that's not it. He says, the difference is, and this is a big difference. He said, when you're at a pro team, you have an organization around you. Yes, college has assistants. The NBA has assistants. Yes, college has players. The NBA has players. They're both paid. But you have a battery of scouts. You have a general manager that's in charge of acquiring and moving talent on, so forth. He says you have a full organization there, plus rules in place, as he said, that are not in place in college. There's X amount you can spend. All right? How do we work around that number? How do we get to that number? How do we stay under that number? The Lakers may have LeBron. They may have Luka Doncic. They may have Austin Reeves. But there's only X amount of money that even the Los Angeles Lakers can spend. The Oklahoma City Thunder can spend just as much money as the Lakers. And they've got Chet Holmgren. They've got Williams. They've got Alex Caruso. And they've got the MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And they can spend as much money as the Lakers, as much money as the Celtics. And as Mike Krzyzewski said, in the NBA, I would have an organization around me as opposed to the college situation right now. Because of the lack of leadership in college athletics right now, instead of just Stop going to Congress with your hat in your hand and sit down and start pounding out a solution to take care of this. And they won't do it. Every time I go past that building in Indianapolis, it's right there in the river. You go by, I mean, when I'm in Indy, and I've been in Indy already, twice this year, twice in the last 2 months, right? Every time I go by, I'm like going, what are they doing in there? Now, I do know that in other words, they're running 88 championships. I get that part. And they're very good, by the way, at running championships. Okay, if you're going to say something negative about a group, also have the ability to praise what they do, too. It allows you to give some balance to the commentary. But they need to sit down, and if they want to, name a commissioner of football, name a commissioner of basketball, and get the ball rolling in the direction of some sort of collective bargaining agreement, because they've got to somehow get control on the playing field. Back to Mike Krzyzewski. In the NBA, they have a system which allows them to have a playing field. It doesn't, look, as somebody who just drove by the Moda Center, literally where the Portland Trailblazers play, I mean, like, we literally went right by it on the highway on I-5. The Blazers aren't good. They aren't. But the Detroit Pistons have been able to elevate themselves from near the bottom to near the top in a couple of years. Because there's a system.
Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Purdy Insurance and Sunbury Motor Company. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And we welcome everyone back to the show. Half hour being brought to you by our great friends at Purdy Insurance. Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Purdy Insurance gets it done for all of you. We have a multitude of insurance needs: auto, home, life, business, boat, motorcycle, RV. We don't just have an insurance need. You need somebody that would go out there and organize it, keep you fully insured, update your policies, and save you money. They do a great job of all that and more, because customer service means everything to them at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. Very pleased to be joined by my good friend Mark Wogenrich. Mark, how have you been?
Doing great, Steve. How are you?
Doing very well, very well. Refreshed after the West Coast trip, so there we go. So the media had a chance to sit down and talk with all of the coaches, including the general manager, Derek Hoosier. What were some of your takeaways after meeting the staff for the first time?
I thought it was a really interesting group of people in that they seemed very different of each other, but also very complementary in the way they work together. It's a group, I mean, it seems very common among coaching changes that, especially coaches going from head coach to head coach role are going to bring people with whom they're familiar with, and that's what Matt Campbell did here with, bringing Taylor Mauser and with, Ryan Clanton, the offensive line coach, and Derek Hoosier as general manager, and then filling the other spots with people with whom he's familiar with, but outside coaches, that sort of thing. But the coaches who followed Matt Campbell from Iowa State, all had this sense of, I'm going to describe it as this sort of, like, they're very familiar and they're very complementary with what Matt Campbell wants to do, but they have this independent streak too, that they operate and kind of run their own rooms, their own position groups, their own offense. Similar with like what Taylor Mauser, and that he feels like he's got really strong free reign to run that offense. And same way with Ryan Clanton, talking about his offensive line and how he wants to recruit and develop those particular players under Matt Campbell's system. And so I felt like these were a group of guys who know exactly what Matt Campbell wants and are willing, and they work really well within that framework. I mean, just for example, like a guy like Jake Waters, the quarterback's coach, knows exactly who Rocco Becht is and exactly how he fits in with Matt Campbell's offense. But then discussed talking about some of the quarterbacks whom they recruited, like the two quarterbacks they brought from Iowa State, the recruits, the one recruit and the player who was on last year's roster, Alex Mance, but also like going and getting an outside quarterback, the Division III quarterback from Virginia, Connor, and I'm totally blanking on his last name. I don't have it in front of me, but a guy who threw for like a bunch of yards last year, was a Gallardi finalist, that sort of thing, and everything kind of fits into the structure of what Matt Campbell wants. Like Heike Malo, same thing, fitting in with Matt Campbell's defensive structure, and then under that with Danton Lynn's defensive structure, but in teaching defensive line play and the way he does it specifically with his tackles. And with Derek Hoosier, the GM you talked about, he was really fascinating, I think, in talking about just how they went about putting this roster together, knowing I think it was the 24 players who they were really interested in bringing in from Iowa State, and they knew that they had good players, and they felt like they had good players to bring, but also knowing that they had to go outside and really had to be mindful of the portal and how they were going to use money, where they were going to spend money. They had a roster, like an entire roster to rebuild, so they had to prioritize certain positions, certain places where they were going to spend that money, that sort of thing. So I just felt like they all seemed to work worked kind of seamlessly together while having a bit of an independent streak too, which I think I found that a little bit refreshing.
Well, the part about Hoosier that amazes me, and he had, obviously had to work. I mean, had help with this. But it's not just who you're targeting, but you have to put together the money part and make the financial pieces fit together, and they had to do that in a very short period of time, Mark.
Yeah, that's one of the things I asked him, is like, where did you prioritize your money? And, I mean, he kind of broke it down in one, retention. Look at the players, who they brought back. Clearly they had ideas of who were important, the players who were important. The two offensive linemen, Anthony Donko and Cooper Cousins, Andrew Rappleyea at tight end, Kobe Howard at wide receiver, some of the running backs, and then defensively, Mon Kamaju, the cornerbacks who they brought back. Getting the linebackers, Tony Rojas, Alex Tash, and on and on, that sort of thing. So he had priorities there. Then he had to pay his players. Rocco Becht's not going to come cheap. He is a high-profile quarterback, and they brought a significant number, especially offensive players, in from Iowa State. And I think one of the underrated things, and I wrote about this when Ryan Barker announced that he was returning, I think that's a really kind of underrated.
That's a huge one.
Player who, again, and he had to cost. There's financial impact there too, because that's a player. You get a kicker who was essentially perfect from 40 yards, in last year. As a position you don't have to worry about. It's not like you have to bring him in and teach him a new scheme. It's like, just go do your thing, just go kick. And you're kind of that piece that can help us keep us in games. That's even very important. So that's kind of goes across like an entire roster that he had to, Derek Hoosier and Matt Campbell and the whole team really had to prioritize. And that's a small detail. I think that really matters, though.
No, and again, Barker, I thought of the guys that Penn State had. Barker, to me, was one of the top 5 or 6 guys that actually would be targeted by other programs because of the specialized skill, and everybody needs points. And I guess the way I understand it is Ryan got a lot of interest, and the key for him was to say, okay, here it is, and then go back to Penn State and say, hey, look, this is what they've offered me other places. Let me know. He says, it sounds to me like Barker's going to get his money, but it's more of a hometown discount. Like, in other words, because he really wanted to stay here. But he found out what his value was in the open market, which is what any player should be doing, Mark.
Oh, no question. I mean, everybody did that. And some players found out that their value specifically might have been greater somewhere else. I mean, look at a player like Amari Campbell, who left. Maybe he found that there was a value for him. He was valued more dollars and cents wise somewhere else than he was at Penn State, that's fine. They knew they were going to lose. They couldn't value out everybody in the program. One of the things that Terry Smith said, just as an example, he said we knew we wanted to retain one tight end off the roster. So who was that going to be? Well, it was Andrew Rapplier, which means that other tight ends left, like Luke Reynolds. Luke Reynolds going to Virginia Tech. Matt clearly, when he spoke with us in December at his introduction, he said, he appreciates having a heck of a lot more money than he did at Iowa State, but it doesn't mean it's unlimited and endless. That there are still the retention couldn't be 70 players off that roster because it's difficult to pay for that, and then also repopulate players elsewhere. So they had priorities, and I think that's really that was probably, I would think, one of the most difficult things for Hoosier and Campbell to do is to just go through the line item and see what each player is going to cost, how they value that player, and how they're going to fit into this roster. And that's obviously going to change in the future because they're going to be paying, maybe they'll go out into the portal and maybe it'll look probably more like it did under James Franklin, where you're targeting players instead of just having kind of this wholesale rebuy, which is what they had to do in year one.
Exactly. And by the way, Connor Berry, I think, is the quarterback you were thinking of.
Yeah, that was it. I know it was right.
No, I just wanted to make sure that, we got the name out there for everybody. Interesting, the last year, for example, Penn State had a defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles, and he was the coordinator, no position. In the last couple of years, Andy Koltonicki, offensive coordinator, no specific position. Now, Danton Lynn seems to fall into that category, but Ryan Clanton on offense will coach the tight ends. How do you feel about how do those coaches feel about the respective approaches of overall versus position plus overall?
Taylor Mauser seemed to be.
Well, I meant Taylor Mauser. I think I said Ryan Clanton. I meant Mouse.
Yeah, Mouse, right. And that was everybody's call. They were already calling him Mouse. Even I think Terry Smith was calling him Mouse. After like 6 weeks. So I guess that's the nomenclature now. He seemed to be like he wanted that aspect of the job. Like he likes working with tight ends. So that sounds to me more like personal preference, and I think that's why you see what Matt Campbell did is hired and very specific line coaches too, in that Kakamalo is going to be working with the tackles, and then they're going to have a defensive defensive ends coach who I didn't get a chance to speak with, and that means Danton Lynn overseeing the whole piece, and Vate, I think his last name is Vate, who's going to be, I don't have the coaching staff in front of me, working with the linebackers. I felt like
that's Vate.
I felt like Taylor
that's doing
Mauser
that.
liked the idea of still having a position to work with, and that just seemed like where he felt most comfortable. So I think that's probably what Matt Campbell likes to do is give these guys, they have the higher end responsibility, but if there is a position that they're going to be specifically that they want to work with or have a really good feel for, that he's going to give them that responsibility too.
Yeah, which is I find interesting because I remember this is during bowl prep, and I had a chance to talk with Ryan Waters, who's the quarterback coach, and he was at practice several times. So I just got a chance to talk to him. He told me, he said, one of the things that Matt does, Campbell, is he lets the coaches coach. It doesn't mean he doesn't have to step in if he's got an opinion on something. He is, after all, the head coach. But essentially, he just lets them coach. And I get the impression when you were talking to him, you got the same feeling.
Very much so, especially like I made more rounds of the offensive crew. The guys who really knew him, Mouse and like I said, Brian Clanton. I talked to Jake Waters for a good bit, just about the quarterbacks room, and Jake Waters had that really good feel already of his quarterback room is going to look like, what he wanted, for instance, what he wanted Rocco Beck to do through spring practice, and what he wanted the young quarterbacks, Mansk and Barry. Connor Barry's not young, but like the new quarterbacks coming in, what he wanted them to do while Rocco Beck was really not out there practicing. He felt empowered. It sounded like he felt empowered, and I think Taylor Mauser very much seems the same way, that he runs that operation that Matt Campbell just lets him go and trusts him with it. And he said that he respects and appreciates that part of it. And by contrast, Matt Campbell said that he thought Taylor Mauser has like this fearlessness as a play caller that gives him, that he respects to kind of let him go and do his thing there. The other interesting point that some of the coaches made, particularly about Mauser, was that he's not a credit hog, for lack of a better term. And that's just specifically talking about him and his role in the offense, that if a player comes up with like a scheme or, like a formation or a play or something like that, or a tweak, and he uses it, it's not his, it's theirs. And that, he runs it, but the whole system is like that. Mauser views it as theirs and not his. And that kind of thing, I think that goes a long way when you give, especially when you have a quarterback as experienced as Rocco Beck is, and you give them that license to have a bunch of like worthwhile input.
No, and that's an important part. I don't know. There's so many new coaches there, but there's still Justin Lustig there, special teams, and still Terry Smith there. Did you cross paths with them? And if so, what were their impressions of working with new people while still staying here?
Yeah, I did not get to Justin Lustig. I didn't have time, but I spent a lot of time with Terry because I really wanted to hear his thoughts, because I found him to be probably outside of Danton Lynn. I just think it's the fascinating idea that Danton Lynn, who I think he's a head coach within 3 to 5 years. I would say maybe sooner.
No doubt.
So I don't know how long you're going to have him on that roster. Like, his arc is just, I think it's just upward. That the trend's entirely upward. But Terry, to me, was the most fascinating person because he is, I think, the most central figure in all of this. He ran that team for 2 months last year, and now he's back in his former role, but he called it a bigger role. And what he said was that he feels, I think he feels more empowered by Matt Campbell to be the associate head coach. And it wasn't, he didn't feel like it's necessarily a title anymore, that he has a lot of input, and he had to give Matt Campbell a lot of input, specifically, roster, discussing the roster, going through the rebuild and who, like players to retain and, what Terry knew about those guys. But Matt respects the fact that Terry knows the program. Terry knows the program's history. Terry knows, the program, not just history, but he knows the program of now, too. And I think that was incredibly important. I think one of the and I wrote about it this week, one of the really interesting things Terry Smith said is while Matt Campbell was going through the whole process of hiring coaches and going through the transfer portal and meeting the players he was retaining, like from last year's roster, and going on the road recruiting, he had set up Zoom meetings with with Penn State Letterman, going by decade. I think they started with players from the 50s and did Zooms by decade with these with the former players and that was Matt's kind of vision of outreach to say, hey guys, here's my vision for the program. I'd like you to be on board. And so it went beyond prioritizing, hiring Letterman, or retaining Letterman, like Dan Connor and Trace McSorley and Alan Zamitis and Jordan Hill. And James hired a ton of Letterman, too. I think he had 15 or 16 on the staff. But it seemed the point that Terry was making was that Matt Campbell did this outreach to these players to get them to understand what he wants to do with the program, and kind of, it's not welcoming them back, but saying your input is valued. And Terry really stressed that. I think he talked about that a couple times, and I found that to be really interesting coming from Terry Smith's perspective, that he noticed how important that was.
Yeah, because it goes back to the first meeting when they brought all the Lettermen in, and there wasn't a lot of time spent with them. And I think that didn't help. Okay. Danton, you mentioned Danton Lynn. He's been out on the West Coast for a long time. His wife's from the West Coast. Of course, his dad coached a lot out on the West Coast, too. What did it take for him to come back east and to rejoin Penn State? What was it about this job to come back, to uproot his family, which has Southern California roots, to be back here?
I think that's a great question that hopefully we can continue asking, because I don't know how fully he necessarily answered it. I think, he made points about his ties to Penn State, obviously, and what he feels like Matt Campbell's role will be with the program. But I don't know. I don't know exactly what it was. He didn't quite fully flesh, at least to us, when I was there, fully flesh out that answer. It just felt like that he felt like this was the right time and place and combination. Okay. That I think he liked what Matt Campbell was offering. He liked the fact that he was going to give him, the defense really to kind of construct on his own, and that he also, it's definitely very compelling that he's coming back to work with people who he knows. There are some people in the building that he knows. Obviously, his relationship with Terry, right. Going back too. So I feel like that those were some of the things involved, but I don't know what specifically. And I would like maybe we can, as we kind of get to know and talk to Danton maybe a little bit more over the next couple of months before this season. Like, what did he see necessarily in Penn State that this was the right time as opposed to last year? I know there were overtures made last year. He signed that contract extension with USC, and Matt Campbell made a point to say there was a complicated contract to get him out of. So, and I know Lincoln Riley made an effort to retain him too, once again. So this I don't know if Danton looks at this as his kind of next phase to becoming a head coach. Like, this is a new place or a new way to do that, to start with a new coach and build a new defense, do it again, prove that he continued to do it in different circumstances and different cycles and stuff like that, and maybe just again working at the alma mater kind of thing. But I do think, this is me saying it, I do think that this is just this is his road, to becoming a head coach. Maybe there's just he said, this is a great next step toward becoming a head coach.
Always a pleasure. There's a lot of information in there, Mark. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Great talking to you, Steve. Thanks.
The great Mark Wogenrich. Half hour brought to you by Purdy Insurance here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.